Hello, my name is Pretesh. I'm one of the final year medical students from BSMS. During my fourth year, I had the opportunity to partake in some research. Now, being someone who's always been quite interested in the heart, I decided to focus mine on cardiac surgery. In particular, I looked at aortic valve replacements and we compared outcomes between the traditional kind of full stenotomies compared to more novel minimal invasive approaches. The reason why we compared minimal invasive approaches to full stenotomies is because minimal invasive approaches are gaining a lot of popularity within the cardiac field. And this is because they involve either a small dissection of the sternum, or you can do something called a right anterior mini thoracotomy, which is where you go through the second intercostal space. Ultimately, this means that there is a smaller scar, which is a massive cosmetic value to the patient, and there's also a smaller dissection, which means there's less chance of blood loss or damage to internal structures. For this project, we analysed data from 646 patients who underwent an isolated aortic valve replacement here in Brighton between January 2014 to November 2022. As it's an observational study to kind of minimise the effects of bias, we performed a propensity score analysis. And this left us with 128 well-matched case pairs in a full stenotomy and the minimal invasive group. Once we had our two patient groups, we then compared outcomes between them. We looked at a range of factors, but these include intraoperative variables such as blood loss, aortic cross-clamp and cardiopulmonary bypass times. Additionally, we looked at post-operative things such as post-operative hospital stay and mortality rates. The reason why we focus on those kind of intraoperative variables is because they give the greatest indication for post-operative morbidity and mortality. Ultimately, we found that following a minimal invasive approach, these were associated with a significantly increased cardiopulmonary bypass and aortic cross-clamp times. However, they were associated with a reduction in blood loss. Despite the increase in cardiopulmonary bypass and aortic cross-clamps following a minimal invasive approach, we saw no difference in adverse outcomes between a full stenotomy and a minimal invasive. And so this led us to conclude that a minimal invasive approach is a safe and effective technique for aortic valve replacements. The second part of our project was to determine what proportion of these patients would qualify for the minimal invasive procedure, namely the right anterior mini thoracotomy. The reason why we put this one is because it's got the most stringent anatomical criteria. I then looked through and analysed the preoperative CT scans of minimal invasive patients and ultimately found that 70.1% of these patients satisfied all the main criteria for a right anterior mini thoracotomy. In doing this project, we hoped that the results would help guide and potentially influence surgeons' clinical decision-making in the future, particularly when deciding what surgery to go for. We ultimately found that the minimal invasive approach is of equal effectiveness to the full stenotomy. I was then fortunate enough to be able to present some of our findings at the British and Irish Society for Cardiothoracic Surgery conference in London this year. And it was a great privilege, and it was really rewarding to be able to see our results being published and demonstrated in front of all the surgeons in the country.